Leader has vowed to uproot deposed President Omar al-Bashir's regime and release protesters. This in a bid to placate demonstrators demanding civilian rule.
Leader number 3 for Sudan in as many days. Yet another army commander, promising victorious and jubilant protesters that there will be a civilian government to follow 3 decades of autocratic rule under Omar al-Bashir. Still, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan Abdel Rahman says the transition could take up to 2 years. And the crowds on Khartoum's streets are impatient for change and an end to rule by men in fatigues. Al-Bashir was arrested on Thursday after 4 months of protests over rising food prices, high unemployment and growing repression. Defence Minister Awad ibn Auf took over as interim leader, but stepped down after just 1 day. Burhan was sworn in on Saturday. He was the military's number 3, but is believed to be more ready to talk to the demonstrators. And protests claimed another high-profile scalp Saturday, Sudan's powerful intelligence chief Salah Ghosh. Buoyed by success, protesters ignored an overnight curfew Ibn Auf attempted to impose. Burhan has now cancelled those curfews and promised to release political prisoners. The military council so far says it won't extradite Bashir, indicted almost 15 years ago by the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
My colleague Nzinga Kunta spoke to Dr. Bashir Oman from the Sudan Solidarity Group about his reaction to the past week's events in Sudan.
The past week has been the culmination of a brave, unprecedented revolution that has been ravaging throughout the country, led by the youth and women and people from all walks of life, to get rid of a dictatorship that has been governing our country for 30 years. On the 6th of April, on the anniversary, it's the 35th anniversary of a successful revolution in 1985, the protesters have taken the brilliant move to gather in front of the military headquarters in Khartoum to convey the message and ask for the support of the military and the army to help in deposing of the military and the dictator Omar al-Bashir and his regime. Mm-hmm. That sit-in has been intensifying over the days, culminating in an insurmountable pressure that led at the end to successfully the departure of Omar al-Bashir.
Okay, there's about 5 million people from Sudan living outside of the country. What role, if any, did they play in that removal of him as president?
Yes, people actually, Sudanese people in the diaspora have always been in connection with what's happening in our country back home. We followed everything every day. We are involved in every details, and we pledge support to the protesters, to all the groupings on the ground, and we try to bring the voice of the revolution to all our brothers and sisters in all over the world, and especially here in South Africa. And that has been the role of our grouping here, the Sudan Solidarity Group, SA. Mm-hmm.
Talk to us about the issues at the heart of that protest. Some of the things that we're reading is that those protests actually started around December over the price of bread and then escalated to saying, we want this president to go.
Well, that's true. That started as a rejection of some price hikes in basic foods and other stuffs, but it quickly changed to a full political movement that was seeking the deposition of the dictator Omar al-Bashir and his regime. And the thinking behind that is that all these hardships and difficulties were, in fact, the results and manifestations of the failure of this regime. Sudan, since 1989, has been isolated from the rest of the world, has been punished because of the regime. The picture of Sudanese people and their culture have been tarnished, and Sudan has been marred by a lot of wars and conflicts that all were sponsored by the current regime. So all the difficulties that we have now in our thinking are actually results of the regime failures. Hence, the idea of getting rid of the regime itself rather than trying to piecemeal attending to these problems.
So we're hearing that there's still protests in Sudan. One of the unhappiness is that of military rule. People are saying, civilians are saying they want to be under civilian rule, not military rule. And we're hearing the military saying that that transition is going to take around 2 years. What's your view on that?
Well, look, the reality is the Sudan has been ruled by this military dictatorship for 30 years. And obviously, the aspiration of the people is for a full-fledged democracy. But there are certain things that we needed to deal with. And first of all, the first achievement was to depose of Omar al-Bashir, and that happened. The second thing was to get rid of his extension. That was the general that followed him. And fortunately, that didn't take long to get rid of him. And now we are dealing with a somewhat sympathetic military council that has been received warmly yesterday in the streets. And today they released their statements, which to some extent answer to some of the people's demand, not yet fully satisfactory. And I could say that it is now a time for intense and thoughtful political process to find out ways of improving what has been offered by the military council. I would like to bring to your attention that a meeting between the Coalition for Change and Freedom that represent the revolutionaries and the military council has just ended. It has been described as positive by Omar al-Bashir, who is the lead of the delegation, and it called for more elaborate discussions of all issues, restructuring of the security and intelligence forces, inclusion of civilians in the transitional council, and the formation of a civilian cabinet with wide responsibilities. However, the sitting in front of the military headquarters continues, and in fact it is intensified as we talk now, and more pressure is mounting on both sides, the military council and the negotiators from the forces for change and freedom, to find a solution that's suitable and agreeable by all.
Dr. Bashir Omar
on a
from the Sudan Solidarity Group, thanks so much for your time on SABC News. Can you briefly wrap up what that positive note is as we go into the break?
On a positive note, al-Bashir conveyed to the protesters a message from General Burhan, the current leader of the council, that he was encouraged by the determination and the courage of the protesters to depose of his predecessor. So that actually in itself is a good message that there is now some sort of synergy between the military and the protesters outside. And I hope that will translate into more positive outcomes and more achievement of the revolution's goals.